How much protein do you really need to build muscle? Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to Vital Living. If you've been training for any amount of time, you've probably heard a lot of different opinions about how much protein you need to build muscle. Some people say you only need a little. Others say you need to eat massive amounts of protein every day. It can get pretty confusing. Today, I'm going to give you a clear, honest, and science-based answer to the question, how much protein do you really need to build muscle? We're going to look at what the actual research says, how much protein you should aim for per day, how much you should eat per meal, whether timing matters, and how your needs might change depending on your situation. This isn't going to be one of those videos where someone just throws out a random number like, eat 2 grams per pound of body weight. We're going to break it down properly so you can actually understand what works and why. So if you want to stop guessing and start eating protein in a way that actually supports your muscle building goals, stick around. Let's get into it. Why protein matters for building muscle. Before we talk about numbers, let's quickly cover why protein is so important when you're trying to build muscle. Muscle tissue is made up of protein. When you train, you create small amounts of damage in your muscle fibers. To repair that damage and make your muscles bigger and stronger, your body needs amino acids, which come from protein. If you don't eat enough protein, your body doesn't have the raw materials it needs to recover and grow. Even if you train hard and eat enough calories, low protein intake will limit how much muscle you can build. On top of that, protein helps with recovery, reduces muscle breakdown, and supports overall training performance. So yes, protein is extremely important. But the question is, how much do you actually need? What does the research say? There have been quite a few studies and meta-analyses looking at protein intake and muscle growth. Here's what the current evidence shows. For most people who are training with weights and want to build muscle, the optimal protein intake appears to be in the range of 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. Some studies suggest that going slightly higher, up to around 2.3 to 2.5 grams per kilogram, might provide a small additional benefit, especially if you're in a calorie deficit or if you're very lean. But for most people, anything above 2.2 grams per kilogram doesn't seem to offer much extra benefit for muscle growth. On the lower end, the general recommendation for sedentary people is only about 0.8 grams per kilogram. But if you're training hard, that amount is almost certainly too low if your goal is to maximize muscle growth. So in simple terms, minimum for muscle growth, around 1.6 grams per kilogram. Sweet spot for most people, 1.8 to 2.2 grams per kilogram. Upper end, especially when cutting, up to 2.3 to 2.5 grams per kilogram. Protein needs based on body weight. Let's make this practical. Here's what the numbers look like for different body weights. If you weigh 60 kilograms, 132 pounds, aim for 100 to 140 grams of protein per day. If you weigh 70 kilograms, 154 pounds, aim for 115 to 160 grams of protein per day. If you weigh 80 kilograms, 176 pounds, aim for 130 to 180 grams of protein per day. If you weigh 90 kilograms, 198 pounds, aim for 145 to 200 grams of protein per day. If you weigh 100 kilograms, 220 pounds, aim for 160 to 220 grams of protein per day. These ranges are solid for most people who are training consistently. You don't need to be at the very top of the range all the time. But staying somewhere in the middle to upper end is generally a good idea if muscle growth is your priority. How much protein should you eat per meal? This is another common question. Some people think you can only absorb a certain amount of protein per meal, like 20 to 30 grams. The reality is a bit more nuanced. Your body can absorb and use more than 30 grams of protein in one meal. However, there is something called the muscle protein synthesis threshold. This means there's a point where eating more protein in one sitting doesn't necessarily lead to more muscle growth. For most people, eating 30 to 50 grams of protein per meal seems to be a good target for maximizing muscle protein synthesis. Going significantly above that, like 70 to 80 grams in one meal, doesn't appear to give extra benefits for most people. So instead of trying to eat 100 plus grams of protein in one meal, it's generally better to spread your protein across 3 to 5 meals throughout the day. Protein distribution throughout the day. How you spread your protein intake across the day can matter. Research suggests that spreading your protein relatively evenly across 3 to 5 meals is better for muscle growth than eating most of your protein in just 1 or 2 big meals. For example, if your target is 160 grams of protein per day, you might do something like breakfast, 35 to 40 grams, lunch, 40 to 45 grams, post-workout meal, 40 grams, dinner, 40 grams. This kind of distribution tends to keep muscle protein synthesis elevated more consistently throughout the day compared to eating very large amounts of protein at once. That said, you don't need to be extremely precise. As long as you're hitting your total daily protein target and spreading it somewhat reasonably across the day, you'll be fine. Does protein timing matter? Protein timing, especially around workouts, used to be considered very important. The idea of the anabolic window suggested that you needed to eat protein within 30 to 60 minutes after training. Current research shows that the anabolic window is much wider than we once thought, especially if you've eaten protein within a few hours before training. For most people, as long as you eat protein within a few hours after your workout, you're fine. That being said, having a protein-rich meal or shake after training is still a good idea for recovery and convenience. It's just not as critical as many people used to believe. Eating protein before bed, especially slow-digesting protein like casein, can also be beneficial for overnight muscle recovery, especially if you train in the evening. Protein quality and food sources. Not all protein is created equal. Animal proteins, meat, fish, eggs, dairy, are generally considered complete proteins because they contain all the essential amino acids your body needs. Plant proteins can also be complete, but many are lower in certain amino acids, especially leucine. For building muscle, leucine is particularly important because it triggers muscle protein synthesis. Animal proteins tend to be higher in leucine, which is one reason they're often considered superior for muscle growth. However, you can still build plenty of muscle on a plant-based diet if you eat enough total protein and combine different plant protein sources. Some of the best high-quality protein sources include chicken, turkey, lean beef, fish and seafood, eggs and egg whites, Greek yogurt and cottage cheese, whey and casein protein, milk. How your protein needs change in different situations. Your protein needs aren't fixed. They can change depending on your situation. When cutting, losing fat, you generally want to eat higher protein, closer to 2.2 to 2.5 grams per kilogram. This helps preserve muscle while in a calorie deficit. When bulking, gaining muscle, you can sit in the middle of the range, around 1.8 to 2.2 grams per kilogram. You don't necessarily need extremely high protein when you're in a surplus. As you get older, protein needs tend to increase slightly with age due to something called anabolic resistance. People over 40 to 50 may benefit from eating on the higher end of the range. If you're very lean, the leaner you are, the more important it becomes to eat enough protein to protect muscle. Common myths about protein intake. Let's clear up a few common myths. you can only absorb 30 grams of protein per meal. This is not entirely accurate. Your body can absorb much more. The 30-gram number refers more to how much can effectively stimulate muscle protein synthesis in one sitting. Eating too much protein is bad for your kidneys. For healthy people, high protein intake doesn't damage the kidneys. This myth mainly applies to people who already have kidney disease. You need to eat protein every 2 to 3 hours. This is outdated, as long as you hit your total daily intake and spread it reasonably. You don't need to eat protein constantly. Plant protein is just as good as animal protein. Plant protein can work very well, but you usually need to eat a bit more of it to get the same effect as animal protein because of lower leucine content and digestibility. Practical recommendations. Here's a simple summary you can use. Aim for 1.8 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day for most people. Spread your protein across 3 to 5 meals per day. Try to get 30 to 50 grams of protein per meal. Prioritize high-quality protein sources, especially animal proteins if possible. Adjust slightly higher when cutting or if you're older. Don't stress too much about perfect timing. If you can consistently hit these targets while training hard, you'll be doing most of what matters for building muscle from a protein standpoint. Final thoughts. Protein is one of the most important factors when it comes to building muscle. While you don't need to go extremely high with your intake, most people who are serious about training benefit from eating more protein than the basic government recommendations. The sweet spot for most people seems to be somewhere between 1.8 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. Going significantly higher than that doesn't appear to offer much extra benefit for muscle growth in most cases. At the end of the day, consistency matters more than perfection. If you're hitting a solid protein intake most days, training hard, and recovering well, you'll make good progress. If you want help figuring out exactly how much protein you should be eating based on your body weight and goals, just let me know in the comments and I can help you calculate it. Also, if you have any questions about protein intake or how to hit these numbers in real life, drop them below. I read pretty much every comment. If this video helped clear up some confusion about protein, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel. We post new content every week about fitness, nutrition, and building muscle effectively. Thanks for watching. Guys, I appreciate you. Eat enough protein, train hard, and I'll see you in the next one.